She was pregnant, kneeling on the sidewalk, and told the millionaire, "My boyfriend beat me. He took her in." But the millionaire hides an even darker past. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel. We post videos like this every day, continuing. The rain pounded against the bulletproof Mercedes windows as Robert Steele observed the city of Denver dissolve into blurs through the drops. The 47-year-old executive adjusted the knot of his Italian tie, an automatic gesture that had long lost its meaning, just like so many other things in his life. The lights of buildings and establishments blended into a blurred kaleidoscope, reflecting in the puddles forming on the asphalt of Central Avenue. 20 years had passed since Elizabeth, his wife, had decided to end her own life. 20 years of self-imposed silence, of meticulously calculated routines, of an existence built around the hotel empire he had erected with iron determination. The Steele Hotel network was now one of the largest in North America, with luxurious properties scattered throughout the continent. But that night something felt different in the air. Perhaps it was the storm that seemed more violent than usual, or perhaps it was just his heart tired of beating in emptiness. "Sir, would you like me to take another route?" "The main streets are starting to flood," asked the driver, adjusting the rearview mirror to meet his employer's distant gaze. "No, George, continue. We need to pass through downtown before heading home." Robert's voice came out hoarser than normal, as if the words struggled to find their way through his dry throat. That's when his eyes caught a movement under an unlit streetlight. A solitary figure bent over herself, uselessly trying to protect herself from the merciless rain. Something about that vulnerable silhouette caused Robert to feel a pang in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in a long time. "Stop the car," he ordered, his voice taking on a tone that admitted no argument. George promptly obeyed, parking the vehicle a few meters ahead. Robert got out, ignoring the driver's protests about safety and the rain that immediately soaked his impeccably cut suit. He approached the figure, and as the distance decreased, the details revealed themselves like precise brushstrokes on a previously blurred canvas. It was a young woman, no more than early 20s, dark hair stuck to her pale face-framed eyes that carried a type of pain Robert knew all too well. But what most caught his attention was the evident protrusion of her belly. She was pregnant, probably in her 6th or 7th month. "Are you okay?" The question seemed almost absurd given the obvious, but it was all he could articulate at that moment. The young woman raised her face, revealing a recent bruise near her left eye. Her lips trembled, and it wasn't just from the cold rain. He said he would change," she murmured, her voice almost lost in the noise of the storm. "But today... Robert felt something awaken inside him. An old, too painful memory to revisit. Elizabeth also spoke like that in the final days, that same tone of apology, that same attempt to justify the unjustifiable. But this time he wouldn't stand still, watching another life shatter before his eyes. "What's your name?" he asked, taking off his soaked jacket and placing it over the young woman's trembling shoulders. "Amy," she responded, hesitant, as if even her own name was something uncertain at that moment. "Amy, you need medical attention. Let me take you to the hospital." It wasn't a request, but it didn't quite reach the level of an order. It was an offer of help that carried the weight of 2 decades of regret. She hesitated, her eyes quickly scanning the deserted street, as if looking for an escape route. "I can't. He'll find me. He always does." "Not this time," Robert assured, his voice taking on a firmness that surprised even himself. "You're safe now." With a gentleness that didn't match his austere appearance, he led her to the car, where George was already waiting with the door open, a look of genuine concern on his experienced face. Amy entered the vehicle like someone entering unknown territory, each movement calculated, each breath measured. During the journey to the nearest private hospital, Robert observed the young woman from the corner of his eye. She kept her hands protectively over her belly, as if trying to defend her child, not only from physical threats but also from the shadows that pursued her. In her eyes, there was a mixture of fear and determination that painfully reminded him of Elizabeth. St. Luke's Hospital was relatively quiet that stormy night. A word from Robert at the reception was enough for Amy to be immediately attended to. The advantages of being one of the institution's largest donors. While she underwent examinations, he remained in the waiting room, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and memories. 20 years ago he had failed to see the signs, to hear the silent pleas for help, to extend a hand when it was most needed. Elizabeth had slipped through his fingers like fine sand, taking with her not only her own life, but also Robert's ability to truly feel anything. The doctor who attended to Amy, Dr. Patricia Wilson, approached him with a grave expression on her face. "Mr. Steele, physically she is stable. The baby too. But there are clear signs of ongoing domestic violence, bruises at different stages of healing, some ribs with marks of old fractures." Robert closed his eyes for a moment, trying to contain the wave of anger that threatened to overflow. "Will she need to be hospitalized?" "There's no medical necessity, but—" The doctor hesitated. "Considering the circumstances, it wouldn't be advisable for her to return home. We have a partnership with a support house for women victims of violence." "That won't be necessary," Robert interrupted her. "She will stay in a safe place." The decision had been made before he even realized it. His property in Aspen, an isolated and well-protected country house, would be the perfect refuge. A place where no one asked questions, where silence wasn't a prison, but a form of healing. When he returned to the room where Amy was, he found her sitting on the edge of the bed, wearing a hospital gown that only accentuated her vulnerability. But there was something else in her eyes now, a spark of hope perhaps. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice still low but firmer than before. Robert considered the question for a moment, how to explain that in her he saw a chance for redemption. How to say that her eyes carried the same weight as Elizabeth's without frightening her even more. "Because sometimes in life we have the chance to do the right thing," he answered simply. "I have a safe property where you can stay until the baby is born, time enough to decide your next step." Amy studied him in silence, as if trying to read between the lines of his offer. "He will look for me, Jake. He doesn't give up easily." "So he won't find you," Robert guaranteed, and there was a certainty in his voice that made Amy shiver slightly. "Unless you want to be found." The young woman passed her hand gently over her belly, a protective and at the same time reflective gesture. "I just want peace," she murmured, more to herself than to Robert. "I just want my child to be born safely." At that moment, something changed in the air between them. A silent connection was established, based not on words, but on shared pain and unspoken promises. Robert realized that for the first time in 20 years, his heart was beating with a purpose different from the mere act of surviving. The rain continued to fall outside, but now it seemed gentler, as if nature itself understood that something important was happening in that hospital room. Her new story was beginning to be written, intertwining destinies that until a few hours ago were complete strangers. George was sent to fetch clothes and basic items at a nearby 24-hour store. Meanwhile, Robert took care of the hospital paperwork and made a few discreet calls. His security team was already in position, ensuring that the transfer to Aspen would occur without leaving traces. When they finally left the hospital, dawn was already approaching its end. On the horizon, the first signs of daybreak were beginning to tinge the sky with soft shades of pink and orange. Amy fell asleep in the back seat of the car, physically and emotionally exhausted, while Robert kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The journey to Aspen would be long, but for the first time in a long time, Robert Steele did not feel alone on his journey. At his side, a young woman carrying not only a new life in her womb, but also the possibility of redemption for a soul long lost in the shadows of the past. The Steele country house rose majestically against the still cloudy sky of Aspen. The century-old construction, with its stone walls and ancient windows, seemed to guard more secrets than time itself. Amy observed the property through the car window, feeling a mixture of admiration and apprehension. The place was impressive, but also intimidating in its solitary grandeur. The vehicle traveled the long dirt road that wound between century-old trees until it parked in front of the main entrance. A lady of approximately 60 years was already waiting for them on the porch. Her face, marked by time, displayed a serene expression that, somehow, made Amy feel a little safer. "Mrs. Martha." Robert greeted her with a brief nod. "Is everything prepared?" "Yes, sir. The blue room is ready, as you requested, and I've prepared a chamomile tea with honey." The housekeeper directed a maternal look at Amy. "You must be exhausted from the trip." Amy just nodded, still adapting to the surreal reality in which she found herself. Less than 24 hours ago, she was living her personal nightmare in the small apartment she shared with Jake. Now she was being welcomed in a historic mansion by people who seemed to have come from another world. Her world of impossible dreams, perhaps. The interior of the house was even more impressive. Carefully preserved antique furniture coexisted with modern pieces in a unique harmony. Works of art decorated the walls, and the smell of old wood mixed with the aroma of fresh flowers arranged in crystal vases. Mrs. Martha led them to the second floor, where a spacious room awaited them. The walls in a soft shade of blue created a welcoming atmosphere, and the large canopy bed seemed to invite rest. Through the French windows it was possible to see the well-tended gardens, and in the distance the mountains that embraced the historic town. "I'll leave you to rest," Robert spoke, his voice taking on a more formal tone. "Mrs. Martha will take care of everything you need. There's an internal phone next to the bed. Her number is 1 and mine is 2 in case you need anything." Before he could withdraw, Amy found her voice. "Mr. Steele." She hesitated for a moment, seeking the right words. "I don't know how to thank." "There's no need," he interrupted her gently. "Just rest. We'll talk more later." When she was alone in the room, Amy allowed the tears to finally roll. They weren't just tears of sadness or fear. There was also relief, confusion, and a hint of hope that she didn't dare admit even to herself. Her fingers absently traced the contours of the bruise on her face, reminding her of the reason that had brought her there. Jake had not always been violent, always been. In the beginning it was just excessive jealousy, then control over her clothes, her friends, her work as a literature teacher at a public school. The physical aggression began subtly, a tighter grip on her arm, an accidental push. When she discovered the pregnancy, she thought things would change. For a few weeks they really did, until the previous night, when he came home drunk and accused her of cheating on him. The soft sound of knocking on the door brought her back to the present. Mrs. Martha entered, carrying a tray with tea, cookies, and some fruits. "You need to eat, child, for the baby." Amy accepted the steaming cup, allowing the comforting aroma of chamomile to calm her. The housekeeper sat in a nearby armchair, her experienced eyes studying the young woman with a mixture of compassion and understanding. "You." "I know, I've seen a lot in this house," Mrs. Martha began, her voice carrying the weight of experience. "I've worked for the Steeles for more than 30 years. I saw Mr. Robert marry Miss Elizabeth, saw the sadness that fell over this place after she left." Amy raised her eyes, suddenly interested. "His wife? What happened to her?" A heavy sigh escaped from the lady's lips. "Some pains are too deep to be understood, my child. Miss Elizabeth was a restless soul, always searching for something that seemed to be beyond her reach. One day she decided she could no longer continue searching." The silence that followed was laden with unspoken meanings. Amy sipped her tea, feeling the warmth of the drink spread through her body, while her mind processed the information. There was more to that story, she could feel it. More layers of pain and secrets hidden in the ancient walls of that house. The days that followed established an almost surreal routine. Amy spent the mornings in the gardens, rediscovering the pleasure of simply existing without fear. The afternoons were dedicated to reading in the impressive library of the house, where rare volumes shared space with classics of world literature. Mrs. Martha was a constant and comforting presence, always attentive to her needs, but also respecting her moments of solitude. Robert appeared only occasionally, usually at the end of the day. His visits were brief and formal, but Amy began to notice small details. The way his eyes softened when he saw her in the garden, The care with which he selected new books to leave in her room, the discreet questions about her well-being asked, to Mrs. Martha. One night, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Amy found him in the library. She had come down to fetch a book, unable to sleep due to restless thoughts. Robert was sitting in a leather armchair, an untouched glass of whiskey at his side, looking fixedly at a framed photograph. "I'm sorry," she murmured, preparing to retreat. "I didn't know you were here." "Stay," he replied, without taking his eyes off the photograph. "Sometimes silence is more bearable when shared." Hesitantly, Amy approached. In the photograph, a young and beautiful woman smiled at the camera. Her eyes, though bright, carried a shadow of melancholy that seemed all too familiar. "Elizabeth," Robert spoke, his voice almost a whisper. "She loved this library. She would spend hours here, lost among the books, creating her own worlds to which I never had access." "What happened to her?" Amy asked softly, sitting in a nearby armchair. Robert finally raised his eyes from the photograph, meeting Amy's. "She threw herself from the cliff behind the house. She left only a note. Some prisons don't have visible bars. At the time I didn't understand, or perhaps I didn't want to understand." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken confessions and wounds still not healed. Amy felt her child move in her womb, as if responding to the intensity of the moment. "Sometimes," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "we think love is enough to change someone. That if we love enough, the person will realize they're hurting us and will change. But that's not how it works, is it?" "No," Robert agreed, a sad smile playing on his lips. "Love can be as efficient a prison as any other. I imprisoned Elizabeth with my silence, with my inability to see beyond the perfect surface we had built. Jake imprisoned you with physical violence. But the result is the same. Suffocated souls, shattered dreams." Amy felt hot tears roll down her cheeks. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "not for myself, but for my child. What kind of life will he have? What example am I running away like this?" "You're not running away," Robert responded firmly. "You're choosing to live. You're choosing to give your child the chance to grow up in an environment without fear, without violence. That's not cowardice, Amy. It's the purest form of courage that exists." That night, something changed between them. The words exchanged in the library created a bridge over the abyss that separated them, not just in age or social position, but mainly in life experiences. Amy began to see beyond the austere figure of the successful businessman, finding a man marked by regrets and a search for redemption. Robert, in turn, discovered in the young teacher a strength that went far beyond her apparent fragility. The days began to flow differently. Robert's visits became more frequent and prolonged. They talked about literature, music, philosophy. She surprised him with her sharp intelligence and unique perspectives on the classics she so loved. He fascinated her with his stories of travels and his deep knowledge of art and history. But there were also moments of shared silence when words weren't necessary. They would sit in the garden, watching the sunset, paint the sky of aspen with impossible colors. In these moments, Amy felt a peace she had never imagined possible, and Robert, for the first time in 2 decades, allowed himself to simply feel, without guilt, without fear, without the crushing weight of the past. One afternoon, as they walked through the garden pathways discussing a book they had both recently read, something shifted in the air between them. The distance that had initially separated them diminished imperceptibly. The air in the library seemed charged with electricity, with unspoken words that danced between their breaths. "Amy," Robert began, his voice hoarser than normal, "what's happening between us is frightening," she completed, without averting her gaze. "And at the same time, it's the most natural thing I've ever felt." "I'm much older than you," he argued, though his hand was already moving to touch her face. "I have a complicated past, scars that may never completely heal, and I carry another man's child," she responded softly. "I have my scars too, Robert, but maybe that's what brings us together. Our imperfections, our pains, our capacity to still believe in love." The first kiss was gentle, hesitant, as if both were testing the reality of the moment. When they separated, there were tears in Amy's eyes, but also a glow of happiness that Robert had never seen before. "We need to go slowly," he murmured, resting his forehead against hers. "Do this right." "Yes," she agreed, a small smile playing on her lips. "We have time." The days that followed brought a new dynamic to the house. The love between them blossomed slowly, naturally, like a rare flower that needs special care to bloom. Robert began to spend more time at the property, reorganizing his schedule to work remotely whenever possible. Amy, in turn, found a new purpose. She began to write a book about her experience, hoping her words could help other women in similar situations. Mrs. Martha observed everything with a discreet smile, noting how the house seemed more alive, more full of light. Amy's laughter echoed through the corridors, mixing with the deep sound of Robert's voice. The garden, once a place of silent contemplation, became the setting for long conversations and moments of growing intimacy. It was on one of those afternoons, in the garden, that Amy found the diary. She was leafing through an old book in the library when a red-covered notebook slipped from between the pages. The elegant handwriting on the first page identified its owner, Elizabeth Steele. For a moment, Amy hesitated. This was sacred territory, memories of a woman who had deeply marked Robert's life. But something compelled her to read, as if Elizabeth wanted her words to be found. The first pages revealed a woman passionate about life, about art, about literature. Elizabeth wrote about her dreams, her fears, her admiration for her strong and successful husband. But as the pages advanced, a pattern began to emerge. The loneliness, the oppressive silence, the sensation of being trapped in a life that, though perfect on the outside, suffocated her from within. "Robert is a good man," Elizabeth had written in one of the last entries. "But his goodness is like a golden cage. He protects me from the world, gives me everything money can buy, but doesn't see that I'm dying inside, not for lack of love, but for excess of protection, for lack of space to be who I really am." Amy closed the diary, her hands trembling slightly. She understood then that the true ghost that haunted that house wasn't Elizabeth's death, but the way she had lived, or ceased to live. That night, when Robert returned from a meeting in Denver, Amy was waiting for him in the library. The diary was on the table between them. "I found this today," she said softly, observing how his eyes widened in recognition. "Her diary," Robert murmured, his hands hesitating before touching the red cover. "I never had the courage to read." "Sister, maybe it's time," Amy suggested, to face not just how she left, but also why she left. For long hours they read Elizabeth's words together. Robert cried for the first time in 20 years, as he truly understood how his love, though genuine, had transformed into a prison. Amy held his hand, offering strength and understanding. "You're different," he finally said, raising his eyes to her. "Not just from Elizabeth, but from anyone I've ever known. You teach me to love without suffocating, to protect without imprisoning. And you teach me that it's possible to trust again," she responded, her free hand caressing the belly that was now entering its 8th month. "That not all love needs to hurt to be true." The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted them. Mrs. Martha appeared at the door, her normally serene face marked by concern. "Mr. Robert," she called hesitantly, "there's something you need to see." On the kitchen table, the local newspaper displayed a headline that made both their blood freeze. "Businessman found dead in Aspen Hotel. Police suspect suicide." The photo showed Jake's face. The impact of the news hit Amy like a punch. Her legs weakened, and if not for Robert, she would have fallen. He gently led her to a chair while reading the details of the report. Jake had left a letter. In it, he confessed a series of crimes, including systematic abuse against Amy and other women before her. He spoke of a sick obsession, of how he couldn't bear the idea of seeing her happy with another man. The letter ended with a plea for forgiveness that sounded more like a last attempt at manipulation. "This is not your fault," Robert affirmed firmly, seeing the anguish in Amy's eyes. "He made his own choices. I know, she responded after a long moment. But still, a lost life is always a tragedy. That night marked a profound transformation in their relationship. The shadow of Jake, which still hovered over them like a distant threat, had dissipated. But with it came the understanding of the fragility of life, of the importance of living each moment with truth and intensity. The following week, Amy began to feel the first contractions. The baby, as if understanding that it was time for a new life to begin, decided it couldn't wait any longer. Robert rushed her to the best maternity hospital in Denver, where, after 12 hours of labor, Michael came into the world. When Robert held the little one for the first time, something definitively broke inside him. He wasn't his biological son, but at that moment he knew he would love him as if he were. In the baby's eyes he saw not only the future, but also the chance to do things differently, to love in a way that liberated instead of imprisoning. "He's perfect," he whispered, returning the baby to Amy's arms. "Just like you. We're a family now," she responded, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "A family built not by blood or duty, but by choice, by true love." The wedding took place 6 months later, in an intimate ceremony in the gardens of the country house. Mrs. Martha cried throughout the celebration, swearing she had never seen the property so alive, so full of true love. Amy wore a simple but elegant dress, carrying Michael in her arms during the exchange of vows. Robert, seeing her walk towards him under the golden sky of the aspen sunset, knew that his life had finally found its true purpose. "I promise to love you with freedom," he said in his vows. "I promise never to transform my love into a prison, but to make it wings for you to fly ever higher." "And I promise to love you with truth," she responded, her voice choked with emotion. "I promise to show every day that love can heal, can transform, can redeem." That night, as they danced under the stars, with Michael sleeping peacefully in Mrs. Martha's arms, both knew they had found something rare and precious. A love that wasn't born of necessity or fear, but of the conscious choice of two souls that, though marked by life, still believed in the possibility of starting anew. And so, among the historic mountains of Colorado, a new love story blossomed. A story that proved that sometimes you need to go through the storm to find peace, and that true love is not that which imprisons, but that which liberates. The years that followed the wedding brought a new dynamic to the Steele mansion. Michael grew strong and healthy, filling the historic corridors with his laughter and hurried steps. Amy had published her first book, a sincere and touching account of her journey of overcoming, which quickly became a bestseller and inspiration for thousands of women in similar situations. Robert, in turn, began to transform his hotel network into something greater than just a luxury empire. Now each property had a wing dedicated to sheltering women in vulnerable situations. On a particularly sunny spring morning, while Amy organized some notes for her next book in the library, an unexpected correspondence arrived. The brown envelope with an official stamp contained documents that made her heart accelerate. They were old police records related to Elizabeth's death. "Ma'am," Mrs. Martha called from the door, her expression concerned. "Mr. Robert just arrived. From New York. Should I tell him about—" "No," Amy quickly responded, storing the documents in a drawer. "Let me talk to him myself." The truth was that for weeks she had been discreetly investigating the circumstances of Elizabeth's death, not out of distrust of Robert, but from a growing feeling that there was more to that story, something that needed to come to light for both of them to really move forward. Robert found her still in the library, his smile dying on his lips when he noticed her serious expression. "What happened?" "We need to talk," she said softly, indicating the armchair beside her. "About Elizabeth." The air seemed to become denser in the room. Robert sat down slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Why?" "Because there are ghosts that need to be exorcised," Amy responded, reaching for the documents in the drawer. "And secrets that need to see the light of day." With slightly trembling hands, she began to share what she had discovered. The police records showed inconsistencies in the investigation of Elizabeth's death. Witnesses who were never properly heard. A suicide. note that presented subtle differences in handwriting. "What are you suggesting?" Robert asked, his voice dangerously low. "I'm suggesting that perhaps Elizabeth didn't kill herself," Amy responded, keeping her voice firm, "and that perhaps you're not the only one who carries guilt for her death." The next hours were intense. Robert revealed details he had kept buried for 2 decades. Elizabeth had been threatened in the weeks before her death. Someone from Denver's high society, someone close, was blackmailing her with information about her past. A past that not even Robert fully knew. "She tried to tell me," he admitted, passing his hands over his tired face. "The night before. She said she needed to tell me something important. But I was too busy with an international negotiation. I asked her to wait until the next day." Amy held his hand, offering silent support as he continued. "When they found her body the next morning, there were marks. Marks that didn't match a fall. But I was so destroyed, so consumed by guilt, that I accepted the official version without questioning. It was easier to blame myself than to face the possibility that someone had murdered her," Amy completed. Softly. "Yes," he whispered. Decades of pain concentrated in that single word. At that moment, Michael burst into the library, his 5 years of pure energy breaking the tension of the moment. "Daddy, look what I drew!" Robert picked him up, a genuine smile lighting his face despite the heavy conversation. The boy showed a colorful drawing of the family. Him, Amy, Robert, and floating above them like an angel, a figure he identified as Aunt Elizabeth. "Mrs. Martha told me stories about her," Michael explained innocently. "She said she was an angel who helps take care of us now." Amy and Robert exchanged a significant look. It was as if Elizabeth, through a child's innocence, was sending a signal. It was time to discover the truth. In the weeks that followed, they initiated a discreet but meticulous investigation. They hired a private detective specializing in old cases. They revisited every detail, every witness still alive, every small clue left behind. The truth, when it finally emerged, was more painful than anyone could have imagined. Elizabeth had discovered a corruption scheme involving several businessmen from Denver's high society, including Robert's then best friend, Alexander Montgomery. The scheme involved money laundering through overpriced artwork, the real reason why Elizabeth spent so much time in galleries and auctions. She wasn't just admiring art, Robert realized, the pieces finally fitting together. She was collecting evidence. The investigation revealed that Alexander had tried to buy Elizabeth's silence with increasingly violent threats. When he realized she wouldn't yield, that she was about to expose the entire scheme, he made the most drastic decision. The final confrontation happened in Alexander's office, now a 70-year-old man, still powerful but corroded by guilt. Robert and Amy confronted him together, armed with irrefutable evidence and the strength of 2 decades of delayed justice. "She was my friend," Alexander confessed, suddenly looking very old and tired. "But the money, the power, they change. People, when she threatened to expose everything, I lost control." The confession was recorded. The authorities were alerted. Alexander Montgomery, the respected businessman, was arrested in his penthouse at the beginning of the night, under the cameras of the local and national press. For Robert, it was as if an immense weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The guilt he had carried for so long didn't completely disappear. Perhaps it never would, but now it was lighter, more manageable. "Elizabeth would have liked you," he said to Amy that night as they watched the stars from the porch. "Your strength, your determination to seek the truth, these are qualities she admired." "She guided us here," Amy responded, resting her head on his shoulder. "Somehow she knew we needed to discover the truth to really move forward." The sound of small footsteps interrupted the moment. Michael, in his superhero pajamas, joined them on the porch. "I couldn't sleep," he explained, nestling between the two. "I had a dream about Aunt Elizabeth." She was smiling. Amy and Robert exchanged an emotional look. At that moment, under the starry sky of Aspen, 3 generations of love, loss, and redemption met. The past, finally revealed, was no longer a threatening shadow, but a part of their story, a love story that transcended death, time, and destiny itself. Michael fell asleep in his father's arms, his serene little face illuminated by the moonlight. Amy observed the two, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. Her life had changed drastically since that rainy night, when a stranger had stopped to help her. What seemed to be just an act of kindness had transformed into a journey of discovery, healing, and true love. And now, with the truth about Elizabeth finally revealed, it was as if a cycle had been completed. Love was no longer a prison, as it had been for Elizabeth. It was no longer a form of control, as it had been with Jake. It was freedom. It was truth. It was the force that had guided them through darkness into light. The revelation about Elizabeth's true death caused an earthquake in Denver's high society. In the months that followed Alexander Montgomery's arrest, other important names began to fall, revealing a web of corruption and crimes that extended for decades. Robert, now seen as the businessman who helped dismantle one of the country's largest money laundering schemes, faced a new battle, keeping his hotel network away from the whirlwind of speculation and investigations. Amy observed with admiration how he conducted everything with serene dignity. During the day, he faced tense meetings with shareholders and investigators. At night, he returned home and devoted himself entirely to the family, as if the weight of the business world didn't exist within the walls of the property. On a particularly busy afternoon, while organizing some old photos found during the investigation, Amy discovered something intriguing. A series of letters exchanged between Elizabeth and a mysterious person identified only as M. The letters dated from the last months of Elizabeth's life and contained veiled references to secrets that could change everything. "Robert," she called, her voice trembling slightly with the discovery. "I think this isn't over." He approached the table where she had spread the letters, his eyes quickly scanning the words written in Elizabeth's elegant handwriting. As he read, his face lost its color. "Margaret," he murmured. "M is Margaret Montgomery." "Alexander's wife?" "Ex-wife," Robert corrected, running his hand through his graying hair in a gesture of concern. They were close friends. Margaret disappeared a few weeks after Elizabeth's death. We all assumed she had fled because of the financial problems Alexander was facing at the time. Amy felt a shiver run down her spine. What if that wasn't it? What if she also discovered something? Before Robert could respond, Michael came running into the office, his eyes shining with excitement. "Mom, there's a lady at the door. She said she knew Aunt Elizabeth." The couple exchanged a tense look before heading to the main entrance. There, standing under the afternoon sun, was a woman of approximately 65 years, elegant despite the evident marks that time and suffering had left on her face. "Margaret," Robert breathed, recognizing her immediately despite the years. "Hello, Robert," she responded with a sad smile. "I think it's time to complete the puzzle." In the hours that followed, gathered in the library that carried so much meaning for all of them, Margaret Montgomery unraveled a story that no one could have imagined. She hadn't simply fled. She had hidden, protecting not only her life but also a complete file of evidence that Elizabeth had gathered. Elizabeth knew she was in danger, Margaret explained, her voice laden with contained emotion. On the last night she gave me a key. She said that if something happened to her, I would know what to do. The key, kept for 2 decades in a bank in Switzerland, opened a safe containing not only documents about the money laundering scheme, but also evidence of even more serious crimes, influence trafficking, bribery of international authorities, and even connections with global criminal organizations. "Why now?" Amy asked gently, noting how Margaret's hands trembled as she held her cup of tea. "Because you proved that the truth can come to light without destroying everything," she responded, looking directly at Robert. "And because Elizabeth deserves to have her story told completely." Michael, who had remained extraordinarily quiet during the entire conversation, approached Margaret with the innocence that only children possess. "Do you also see Aunt Elizabeth in dreams?" Margaret smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "Not in dreams, dear, but I see her in you, in the way your parents have built something beautiful from pain. Elizabeth always believed that true love was capable of transforming everything. That night, after Margaret left with the promise of returning with all the documents, Robert and Amy remained awake until late, processing everything they had discovered. Elizabeth's story, which seemed to have ended with Alexander's arrest, was just beginning to be truly revealed. "I'm afraid," Amy admitted, nestled in Robert's arms as they watched the moon through the library window. "What might these new revelations bring? What dangers might they pose for our family?" Robert gently kissed her forehead before responding. "Elizabeth faced these dangers alone. We are stronger. We have each other. We have Michael. We have the truth on our side. And we have love," she completed, a small smile playing on her lips, "the kind of love that liberates, that strengthens, that transforms." The sound of small footsteps in the hallway announced Michael's arrival, once again, unable to sleep in his own bed. He joined his parents on the library sofa, his sleepy but curious eyes. "Daddy," he murmured, fighting against sleep, "Aunt Elizabeth was a hero, wasn't she?" Robert felt his heart tighten with the innocent question. "Yes, son. She was a hero, who fought for what was right, even when it was difficult and frightening." "Just like Mom," Michael concluded, already almost asleep. "And just like you, Daddy." Amy and Robert exchanged an emotional look over their son's head. At that moment, they understood that Elizabeth's true legacy wasn't the hidden documents or the revealed secrets. It was the courage to fight for what is right, the strength to face one's own shadows, and the capacity to transform pain into love. The moon continued its journey across the aspen sky, a silent witness to one more chapter in that story of love, loss, and redemption. A story that had begun on a stormy night, when a man marked by guilt had stopped to help a frightened pregnant young woman. A story that proved that sometimes you need to lose everything to find the true meaning of love. And while Michael slept, peacefully between them, Robert and Amy knew they would face any storm that came, because their love wasn't built on secrets or fears, but on truth, trust, and the certainty that together they were stronger than any adversity that destiny could throw in their path. The documents that Margaret Montgomery brought to light caused a domino effect in American society. Powerful names began to fall, fortunes built on corruption crumbled, and the truth, so long buried, finally found its way to the surface. At the center of everything, Elizabeth's figure emerged no longer as a fragile woman who had chosen suicide, but as a silent heroine who had given her life for justice. For Robert, each knew, revelation was like reliving Elizabeth in a different way. Through the documents, the letters, and the testimonies that emerged, he began to truly know the woman to whom he had been married, her strength, her determination, her unwavering courage. And in each discovery, he saw reflections of Amy, as if destiny had conspired to bring into his life two extraordinary women who would teach him the true meaning of love. On one particularly significant morning, while the national press was buzzing with another wave of arrests of businessmen and politicians involved in the scheme, Amy found Robert in the library, contemplating an old photograph of Elizabeth. "You know what impresses me most?" she asked softly, sitting beside him. "How she managed to maintain her humanity amid all this. Her letters, they're not just records of crimes and conspiracies. They're also reflections on love, hope, the desire for a better world." Robert nodded, his eyes still fixed on the photograph. "She tried to tell me so many times, not with words but with gestures. The social projects she initiated in our hotels, the insistence on hiring people in vulnerable situations. I saw all this as the whims of a rich and bored woman." "And now you continue her legacy," Amy observed, intertwining her fingers with his. "Each woman who finds shelter in our properties, each life we transform, it's Elizabeth living through our actions." The moment was interrupted by Michael, who came running into the library waving a paper in his hands. "Mom, Dad, look what I wrote." It was an essay for school, titled My Family of Heroes. In it, with the simplicity and sincerity characteristic of a 6-year-old child, Michael told the story of how his parents fought to help people in danger, how his angel aunt Elizabeth had been a secret heroine, and how his family was made not just of blood ties, but of love and courage. Amy felt tears in her eyes as she read her son's words. "It's beautiful, my love, but you know that some people might not understand this whole story about heroes and angels." "It doesn't matter," Michael responded with the surprising wisdom he sometimes demonstrated. "Grandma Martha said that the best stories are those that not everyone understands, but that make our hearts beat faster." Robert laughed, pulling his son onto his lap. "Your Grandma Martha is a very wise woman, and you, my son, have a heart as big as hers." At that moment, Mrs. Martha appeared at the library door, her expression more serious than normal. "Mr. Robert." "Mrs. Amy, there's a visitor. It's Mr. Alexander Montgomery's daughter." The silence that followed was heavy. Laura Montgomery, Alexander's only daughter, had remained completely away since her father's arrest. At 45, she ran an international foundation supporting victims of domestic violence, a work that, they now knew, had been inspired by her own experience as a witness to the abuse her mother, Margaret, had suffered at Alexander's hands. Laura entered the library as if carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her eyes, so similar to her father's, were marked by sleepless nights and contained tears. "I needed to come," she said without preamble. "I needed to look into your eyes and say thank you for revealing the truth, for clearing Elizabeth's name, for giving my mother the chance to finally free herself from fear." Michael, still on his father's lap, observed the newcomer with curiosity. "Did you also know Aunt Elizabeth?" Laura smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "Yes, little one. She was like a second mother to me. When things got difficult at home, I would come here. Elizabeth always had a new book to show me, a story to tell, a hug to offer." "Is that why you chose to help other people?" Amy asked gently. "Yes," Laura responded, tears finally escaping her eyes. "Elizabeth taught me that sometimes we need to be the light we would have liked to find in our own darkness." The conversation that followed was long and emotional. Laura shared memories of Elizabeth that not even Robert knew, moments of complicity, whispered advice, promises of a better future. She spoke about how in the last months of her life, Elizabeth had entrusted to her small fragments of information, like pieces of a puzzle that only now made complete sense. She knew she wouldn't survive to see the truth come to light, Laura revealed. But she believed that one day, someone with enough courage would continue her fight. "I think she would have been proud to see you two, to see what you've built together." When Laura left, hours later, she left behind not only new revelations about the past, but also a feeling that a cycle was completing itself. Elizabeth, through her actions and her sacrifice, had planted seeds of change that were now flowering in unexpected ways. Michael, who had remained extraordinarily attentive throughout the entire visit, asked a question that captured the essence of everything they were experiencing. "Mom, is it possible to love someone we've never met?" Amy exchanged a significant look with Robert before responding, "Yes, my love. True love transcends time, space, even life itself. Sometimes we love people not for what they were, but for what they inspire us to be." That night, as the family dined at the large table in the dining room with Mrs. Martha occupying her place of honor as honorary matriarch, Robert observed the people he loved and reflected on the mysterious ways of destiny. Elizabeth, in her search for justice, had not only exposed crimes and corruption, she had also, without knowing, prepared the way for a greater, deeper, and truer love than he had ever imagined possible. And there, among laughter and conversations, among memories of the past and dreams of the future, Robert understood that Elizabeth's true legacy wasn't in the documents that exposed criminals, but in the love she inspired, in the courage she awakened, in the capacity to transform pain into purpose. A legacy that continued to live through Amy, through Michael, through each life they touched and transformed. Love, after all, was this, not a prison of silences and secrets, but a liberating force, capable of transcending death itself and being reborn in ever more beautiful and true forms. "Look quick," he exclaimed, pulling them by the hand toward the garden. The sky of Aspen was painted in surreal shades of pink and gold, and a double rainbow formed over the historic mountains. But it wasn't just that which had caught the boy's attention. In the center of the garden, a blue butterfly of a rare species, the same one Elizabeth used to draw in the margins of her diary, delicately landed on the white roses she herself had planted so many years ago. "It's a sign from her," Michael declared with absolute conviction. "Aunt Elizabeth is happy with us." Amy and Robert exchanged an emotional look. In that magical moment of twilight, with their son between them and nature offering a spectacle of colors and life, they felt Elizabeth's presence stronger than ever, not as a ghost from the past, but as a guiding light for the future. The launch of Amy's book, Love Without Chains, took place on a special night in the mansion's library. The space, now transformed into a cultural and welcoming center, was filled with people whose lives had been touched in some way by that extraordinary story. Margaret Montgomery, seated in the front row next to her daughter Laura, held a copy of the book with trembling hands. Mrs. Martha, proud as a mother, supervised the last details of the event while trying to disguise tears of emotion. When Amy climbed to the small improvised stage to give her speech, the silence that fell over the audience was almost reverential. Michael, dressed in his best children's suit, held his father's hand tightly, his eyes fixed on his mother with adoration. "This is not just my story," Amy began, her clear and strong voice filling the environment. "It's Elizabeth's story, who paid with her life for seeking the truth. It's Margaret's story, who kept secrets for decades to protect justice. It's Laura's story, who transformed her pain into purpose. It's Robert's story, who learned that true love doesn't imprison, but liberates." She paused, her eyes finding those of each person mentioned before continuing. "But above all, it's a story about the transformative power of love, not the romantic love of fairy tales, but real, imperfect love that grows in the fissures of broken hearts and flourishes even in the most unlikely places." Robert observed his wife with a mixture of pride and admiration. Amy had transformed so much since that rainy night when he found her, not only overcoming her own trauma, but becoming a powerful voice for other women who faced similar situations. The book, which blended her personal experiences with the discoveries about Elizabeth and reflections on the nature of love and freedom, quickly became a national phenomenon. More than a simple account of overcoming, it was a manifesto about the possibility of rebuilding life from the ruins of the past. A week after the launch, while the family enjoyed a rare moment of tranquility in the garden, Michael asked one of those profound questions that only children are capable of formulating. "Daddy, why do bad things sometimes need to happen for good things to exist?" Robert exchanged a significant look with Amy before responding, "You know, son, life is like this garden. Sometimes we need to prune some plants, remove others that are sick, so that new flowers can grow. The bad things that happen are like that pruning. They hurt at the moment, but they open space for something new and more beautiful to be born." "Like you and Mom," Michael concluded with wisdom. "If Aunt Elizabeth hadn't gone to heaven, and if Jake hadn't hurt Mom, you would never have met, right? And you wouldn't exist," Amy completed softly, hugging her son. "Sometimes destiny has mysterious ways of bringing the right people together." The sound of footsteps on the porch announced the arrival of an unexpected visitor. It was a young woman, not much older than Amy when she first arrived at that house. Her eyes carried that same frightened look, that same desperate need for help. "Sorry to bother you," she began hesitantly. I read your book, and I needed to know if it's true. If there really is a place where we can start over." Amy immediately stood up, extending her hand to the newcomer. "What's your name?" "Marina," the young woman responded, her voice almost a whisper. "Welcome, Marina," Robert said, also standing. "You've just taken the first step towards your liberation." While Mrs. Martha was called to prepare a room and provide what the young woman needed, Michael observed everything with interest. Later, when they were alone again, he declared, "Aunt Elizabeth sent her, didn't she? Just like she sent Mom to you, Daddy." Robert and Amy smiled, knowing that, in some inexplicable way, their son was right. Elizabeth's legacy continued to live, Not just in the documents that had exposed the truth, but in each transformed life, in each story of new beginnings, in each love that flourished free from chains. That night, as the moon rose in the aspen sky, the steel mansion embraced one more soul in search of redemption. And in the pages of Elizabeth's diary, lovingly kept in the library, her last words seemed to shine with new strength. True love is like water. It finds its way through the smallest fissures, overcomes the greatest barriers, and in the end, always finds its destiny. The months turned into years, and the steel mansion was consolidated as a true beacon of hope for women seeking new beginnings. What had begun as an improvised refuge for Amy had transformed into a structured support network, with specialized professionals and training programs that allowed women to regain their independence. Marina, the young woman who had arrived that night after reading Amy's book, now coordinated one of the most successful programs, a female entrepreneurship course that had already helped hundreds of women achieve their financial autonomy. Her own story of overcoming inspired the newcomers, showing that it was possible not only to survive, but to thrive. On a particularly significant morning, while Amy organized preparations for the graduation of another class from the program, an unexpected discovery shook the apparent tranquility of the mansion. During a renovation in Elizabeth's old office, workers found a secret compartment behind one of the bookcases. Inside it, a metal box contained a set of cassette tapes carefully numbered and dated. "They're her recordings," Robert stated, his voice trembling slightly as he examined the tapes. The recorder, she always carried a small recorder, said it was for taking notes about her art research. With the help of a specialized technician, the tapes were digitized. Elizabeth's voice, preserved in time, filled the library with even more surprising revelations than the previous ones. She wasn't just documenting a corruption scheme, she was building an international protection network for women fleeing from situations of abuse. "Some stories need to remain in the shadows until the world is ready to hear them," Elizabeth said in one of the recordings. "But the day will come when the truth can be revealed without putting lives at risk. When that day comes, I hope someone continues this work." Michael, now 8 years old, listened to the recordings with extraordinary attention. "Her voice is exactly as I heard in my dreams," he commented, surprising everyone. "Only now everyone can hear it, not just me." The discovery of the tapes brought a new dimension to the work they were already doing. The international connections Elizabeth had established still existed, some maintained by Margaret Montgomery during her years of exile. Now, with the truth finally exposed and the main criminals behind bars, it was possible to resume these contacts and expand the protection network. Laura Montgomery, who for years had directed her own foundation supporting victims of violence, was fundamental in this process. Her experience and international contacts, combined with the steel resources, allowed the creation of an even more robust structure for sheltering and protection. "It's amazing how everything connects," Amy reflected. One night, as she and Robert reviewed the project's expansion plans, Elizabeth wasn't just denouncing crimes, she was building a foundation for the future, even knowing she wouldn't be here to see it. "She always saw beyond the horizon," Robert agreed, his voice laden with admiration and a love transformed by time and understanding. "While I was trapped in the present in appearances, she was already planting seeds for a future we're only now beginning to understand." The impact of the discoveries spread rapidly. Journalists from around the world began to take interest in the story, not just for the criminal and political aspect, but mainly for the network of female solidarity that had survived 2 decades in clandestinity. Amy was invited to give lectures at universities and international congresses, sharing not only her personal story, but also Elizabeth's legacy and the importance of transforming pain into purpose. Her book was translated into several languages, touching lives far beyond American borders. One afternoon, while walking through the gardens with Michael, Amy found her son sitting under Elizabeth's favorite rose bush, talking softly to a blue butterfly that had landed nearby. "What are you telling her?" she asked, sitting beside her son. "I'm telling Aunt Elizabeth about the new girl who arrived today," he responded naturally. "The one who came from Colombia with the small baby. I said she doesn't need to worry, because now we know how to take care of those who need help." Amy felt tears in her eyes, once again amazed by her son's sensitivity and wisdom. Michael had grown up in an environment where love and compassion were the most powerful forces, where helping others was as natural as breathing. That night, during the family dinner that now included not only Mrs. Martha, but also some of the women sheltered in the mansion, Robert made an important announcement. "The Steel Hotel Network is officially changing its name," he declared, his voice laden with emotion. "From today we will be the Elizabeth Network of hotels and welcoming centers, because each of our properties will be not just a place of lodging, but a point of support for those who need to start anew." The announcement was received with emotional applause. Margaret Montgomery, who was present with Laura, raised her glass in a silent toast. Her eyes, meeting Amy's across the table, conveyed a clear message. Elizabeth would be proud. Michael, seated between his parents, smiled that special smile that seemed to hold all the secrets of the universe. "Aunt Elizabeth is smiling now," he whispered. "She always smiles when we do the right thing." And so, under the starry sky of Aspen, the Steel Mansion, now officially renamed the Elizabeth Center for Welcoming and Transformation, continued its mission of transforming lives. The love that had been born on a stormy night had multiplied, touching more and more hearts, healing more and more wounds. Because true love, as Elizabeth had always known, knows no limits of time or space. It flows through generations, overcomes barriers, transforms pain into purpose, and above all, liberates. Like water finding its way among the stones, it always reaches its destiny. Michael's 10th birthday coincided with the inauguration of the first International Elizabeth Welcoming Centre in London. The choice of city had not been by chance. The tapes found in the secret compartment revealed that England had been the first international support point established by Elizabeth in her clandestine protection network. The inauguration ceremony gathered people from various countries, all connected in some way to the story that had begun in a mansion in Aspen. Amy, now an internationally recognized figure for her work with women in vulnerable situations, observed with emotion as Michael cut the inaugural ribbon alongside his father. "In the name of Aunt Elizabeth," the boy declared with a surprising maturity for his age, "I declare this space of love and new beginnings open." The historic building in central London had been completely restored, maintaining its secular architecture, while incorporating modern elements necessary for its new function. On the walls of the main hall, a photographic exhibition told the story of Elizabeth, Amy, and other women who had transformed their pain into purpose. During the cocktail that followed the ceremony, an elderly English lady approached Robert with tears in her eyes. "My name is Mary Woodhouse," the translator began to explain, but she interrupted him, preferring to speak directly in her antiquated American accent. "I knew your Elizabeth," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. 22 years ago, she helped me hide 3 women who were fleeing from terrible situations. At the time, I didn't completely understand what was happening, but Elizabeth told me something I never forgot. Sometimes, we need to be the light we would have liked to find in our own darkness. Robert felt his heart tighten upon recognizing the phrase. They were practically the same words Laura Montgomery had used to describe Elizabeth's impact on her life. "Did you maintain contact with these women?" A smile illuminated Mary Woodhouse's wrinkled face. "Yes, all of them managed to rebuild their lives. One is a doctor now, another a university professor, and the third—" she made a significant pause. "The third is here today, working as the center's coordinator." As if on cue, a middle-aged woman approached, introducing herself as Sophie Adams, Director of Operations for the new center. Her eyes shone with a mixture of gratitude and determination that Robert knew well. It was the same look he saw in Amy when she talked about her work. "Elizabeth saved my life," Sophie declared simply, "and now I can do the same for others." Michael, who had approached silently, took Sophie's hand naturally. "Aunt Elizabeth is happy you're here," he said with that inexplicable certainty he always showed when speaking of her. "She says you're exactly the right person to take care of this place." The moment was interrupted by a growing buzz in the hall. A delegation of women had just arrived. They were representatives of feminist organizations from various European countries, all interested in establishing partnerships with the Elizabeth Network. Amy, who conducted international negotiations, with a skill that surprised all who knew her story, met with the group. Her fluent Spanish mixed with increasingly confident English allowed her to transition easily between different languages and cultures. What began as an act of love and justice in Aspen, she explained to the attentive audience, now transforms into a global network of solidarity. Each center is not just a shelter, but a point of transformation, a place where women can not only hide but rediscover themselves and become stronger. As she spoke, Robert observed with pride how his wife had transformed over the years. The frightened young woman he had found on a stormy night was now a force of nature, capable of mobilizing resources and people on an international scale. And yet she maintained that unique sensitivity, that capacity to deeply connect with each individual story. On the other side of the hall, Margaret Montgomery, who had traveled especially for the inauguration, conversed with a group of social investors. Her experience as the guardian of Elizabeth's secrets for so many years had transformed into a unique expertise in international operations for protecting women at risk. What Elizabeth began 2 decades ago, she explained, was revolutionary for its time. She understood that violence against women knows no borders, social classes, or cultures. Because of this, she created a network that also transcended these barriers. Laura, who now directed the educational part of the project, complimented her mother's words with impressive data and statistics about the impact of the work already done in the United States. In 5 years, we've helped more than 2,000 women rebuild their lives. 90% of them achieved financial independence through our training programs. The night advanced, and Michael, despite the importance of the event, began to show the natural tiredness of a 10-year-old child. Robert found him dozing in one of the hall's armchairs, a small drawing notebook in his lap. On the open page, there was a drawing that made his heart stop for a moment. It was a perfectly detailed portrait of Elizabeth, exactly as she appeared in the last photo taken before her death. But there was something different. In the drawing, she smiled in a way that Robert had never seen in life, a smile of peace and fulfillment. "She appeared like this in my dream yesterday," Michael murmured sleepily when his father picked him. "Bah, she said now she can really rest because her work is in good hands." Amy, who had joined them, caressed her son's hair with tenderness. "You know, sometimes I think you're a gift from her to us, a way of showing us that true love transcends all barriers, even that of death." That night, after all the guests had departed and Michael slept deeply in his room at the hotel, Robert and Amy remained on the balcony of their room, observing the lights of London. The ancient city, with its narrow streets and millennial history, seemed the perfect setting for one more chapter of this story that had begun in such an unlikely way. "Sometimes I wonder," Robert reflected, embracing Amy, from behind as they observed the city, "if Elizabeth knew all this would happen, if somehow she foresaw not just the revelation of the truth, but also our story, the transformation of her tragedy into something so much greater and more significant." "I think she knew," Amy responded softly. "Not the specific details, but the essence. She understood that true love has the power to transcend time, death, all barriers, and she planted the necessary seeds for this to happen." A gentle breeze blew from the Thames River, bringing with it the perfume of the flowers that decorated the balcony. White roses, Elizabeth's favorites, recently found in one more of the mansion's secret compartments. The next day, the Elizabeth Centre in London would receive its first residents, women from different countries, different stories, but united by the same search for new beginnings and liberation. And so, the network of love and solidarity that Elizabeth had begun to weave 2 decades earlier continued to expand, touching more and more lives, transforming more and more stories. Because true love, as Michael so wisely understood, knows no limits of time or space. It simply is, flows and transforms, like water finding its way among the stones, like light penetrating the deepest darkness, like hope flourishing in the most unlikely places. The return to the United States after the inauguration of the Centre in London marked the beginning of a new phase in the Steele's life. The mansion in Aspen, which was already a symbol of transformation and new beginnings, now prepared for even more significant changes. Amy had decided to transform the property into a university specialized in studies on human rights and female empowerment. The Elizabeth House of Advanced Studies, she explained, during a meeting with the team of architects and educators. A place where theory and practice meet, where stories of overcoming transform into academic knowledge, and where future generations will learn to build a more just world. Robert, who had initially hesitated at the idea of so drastically modifying the space that held so many memories, was surprised to realize how the project seemed natural, almost predestined. The old rooms of the mansion, which for so long had harbored secrets and pains, would now transform into spaces of learning and growth. Michael, now with an increasingly deeper understanding of his special role in that story, spent hours exploring every corner of the property before the renovations began. His drawings, increasingly detailed and significant, documented not only the physical spaces, but also the memories and energies they contained. "Here," he said one day, pointing to a sketch of Elizabeth's old room, "should be the main library." Aunt Elizabeth always wanted this to be a place of knowledge and liberation. The project advanced rapidly, attracting attention and support from academic institutions from around the world. Renowned professors offered to join the faculty, and international organizations demonstrated interest in establishing research partnerships. One afternoon, while supervising the installation of the first bookshelves in the new library, Amy received an unexpected visit. Marina, the young woman who years earlier had arrived at the mansion after reading her book, returned now as an accomplished and confident woman. "I've come to apply for a position on the faculty," she announced with a smile. "I've completed my doctorate in social psychology, focusing on trauma and resilience. I want to help other women understand that their stories of pain can transform into instruments of change." Amy embraced her former protégé with tears in her eyes. Marina wasn't just a survivor. She was living proof that the cycle of transformation initiated by Elizabeth continued to bear increasingly significant fruits. The impact of the Elizabeth Network's work was already measurable in impressive statistics. Thousands of women assisted, hundreds of success stories, dozens of aggressors brought to justice. But it was the individual transformations, the small daily victories, that most touched the hearts of all involved. On a particularly significant morning, while the mansion buzzed with preparations for the beginning of the first academic year, Michael found something extraordinary during his explorations: a secret compartment in the lining of Elizabeth's old closet, containing a set of never-sent letters. "These are different from the others," he explained, as he handed the letters to his parents. "These aren't about secrets or denunciations. They're about love." The letters, written in the last months of Elizabeth's life, were addressed to the future, not to a specific person, but to whoever might find their way to that house in search of a new beginning. It was as if she had foreseen not only her premature death, but also the transformation her legacy would provoke. "In reading these words," said one of the letters, "you are probably at a moment of transformation in your life. Perhaps you have arrived here fleeing from something, or in search of something. Perhaps you are questioning your choices, your strength, your capacity to begin anew. I want you to know that you are not alone, that your pain has purpose, your struggle has meaning, and your heart has the power to flourish even in the most adverse circumstances." The discovery of the letters inspired Amy to create a new element in the university project, an interactive memorial where the stories of all the women who had passed through the Elizabeth Network would be preserved and shared, not just as a historical record, but as a source of inspiration and hope for future generations. "Each story is a brick in the construction of a more just world," she explained during the presentation of the project. "Each voice that rises against violence, each heart that finds strength to begin anew, each hand that extends to help another person, all this is part of a greater transformation that transcends our individual lives." Robert, observing his wife with admiration, realized how love had transformed not only their personal lives, but had created waves of change that continued to expand in unimaginable ways. The pain that had once paralyzed him was now fuel for actions that touched thousands of lives. Michael, who had inherited Elizabeth's sensitivity to understand the complexities of the human heart, began to develop his own projects within the university. Even young, he already demonstrated an extraordinary capacity to connect with people's stories and help them find meaning in their experiences. "You know, Daddy," he said one night, as they observed the sunset together from the newly restored porch, "Aunt Elizabeth always says in my dreams that love is like water. It may seem gentle, but it has the strength to transform even the hardest stones." Robert embraced his son, feeling his heart overflow with gratitude and admiration. "And you, my son, are the living proof of that transformation, born from a story of pain but raised in a story of love and redemption." The Elizabeth House of Advanced Studies opened its doors on a spring morning when the white roses in the garden were in full bloom. The first group of students, women from different countries, ages, and life stories, was received with a simple but profoundly significant ceremony. Amy, in her opening speech, shared for the first time publicly the content of one of Elizabeth's newly discovered letters. True love is not just a feeling, it's a force of transformation. It's not just about finding personal happiness, but about creating spaces where others can flourish. It's not about possessing or controlling, but about liberating and empowering. And above all, it's about believing that even in the darkest nights, there exists a light that never goes out, the light of hope, of courage, and of the possibility to begin anew. As she spoke, a blue butterfly, now a recognized symbol of the Elizabeth Network, gently landed on the podium. Michael, seated among the guests, smiled that special smile that seemed to guard all the secrets of the universe. Because he knew, with that inexplicable certainty, he always demonstrated that this wasn't an end, but a new beginning. The story that had begun on a stormy night continued to unfold in new chapters, touching more and more lives, transforming more and more hearts. Because true love, as Elizabeth had always known, knows no limits. It simply flows, transforms, and liberates, always finding new ways to flourish. The first year of operation of the Elizabeth House of Advanced Studies brought challenges and achievements that surpassed all expectations. The academic program, which blended theory and practice, attracted not only students but also researchers and activists of international renown. The mansion, which had once been the setting for secrets and silenced pains, now pulsed with life, knowledge, and transformation. On a particularly significant afternoon, while Amy taught a class on narratives of overcoming, her student raised a question that touched on a deep point. How can we be sure that our suffering has purpose, that our stories of pain can really transform into something significant? Before Amy could respond, Michael, who occasionally attended classes with the special permission his precocious maturity guaranteed him, stood up. With his now 11 years, he had become a unique presence in the institution, a bridge between past and present, between the tangible and the inexplicable. "Aunt C. Elizabeth always says that our pain is like a seed." He spoke with that wisdom that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his age. "It can remain buried for a long time in darkness, but if we know how to water it with love and hope, it will end up flowering into something beautiful." The silence that followed his words was profound and significant. Amy observed how the eyes of several students filled with tears of recognition, as if that simple truth pronounced by a child had touched something fundamental in their souls. Robert, who observed the scene from the classroom door, felt his heart overflow with pride and love. His son wasn't just the product of a story of overcoming, he was a catalyst of transformation in his own right. The night brought an impressive discovery. During a session of organizing the mansion's historical archive, one of the students found a set of old photographs hidden in a false album. The images revealed Elizabeth in various countries, always accompanied by women who, they now knew, were part of her secret protection network. "She left clues everywhere," Margaret Montgomery commented, examining the photos with watery eyes. "Like pieces of a puzzle that could only be assembled when the world was ready to see the complete image." Laura, who had become a visiting professor at the institution, began to organize an exhibition with the photographs. Each image would be accompanied by a story, not just of the woman portrayed, but of the impact her rescue had generated through generations. It's amazing to think, she reflected during the planning of the exhibition, how a single action of love can generate waves of transformation that continue expanding long after we leave this world. The exhibition, titled Portraits of Liberation, became a landmark event in the institution's history. Women portrayed in the old photos came from different parts of the world to share their stories. Some brought daughters and granddaughters, demonstrating how the cycle of transformation initiated by Elizabeth continued to bear fruit through generations. Among the visitors was an English lady, Mary Woodhouse, who had been one of the first women helped by Elizabeth. She brought with her something precious, a diary that Elizabeth had left in her care. "She made me promise to deliver it only when the time was right," Mary Woodhouse explained, her eyes shining with contained tears. "When I saw in the newspapers about this university, about the work you're doing, and I knew the time had come." The diary revealed an as yet unknown facet of Elizabeth, her most intimate reflections on love, justice, and the power of transformation. In one of the most touching entries she had written, "Sometimes I think that true love is like an ancient language. It needs to be preserved, studied, transmitted from generation to generation, not the romantic love of fairy tales, but the love that liberates, that transforms, that has the courage to face darkness to create light. This is the love that can change the world." Michael, upon reading these words, smiled that special smile of his. "That's exactly how she speaks in my dreams," he commented, "as if love were something alive, something that grows and transforms." Mary Woodhouse's presence and her diary inspired a new initiative at the Elizabeth House, the creation of an international exchange program that would allow women from different countries not only to study, but also to contribute with their own experiences and knowledge. "Each story is a textbook," Amy explained during the presentation of the project. "Each cycle of violence broken is a lesson about possibilities. Each new beginning is a chapter in the great narrative of human transformation." The program quickly gained support from international organizations and began to attract candidates from all continents. The mansion, which had once been a secret refuge, now transformed into a beacon of hope recognized worldwide. On an especially significant night, as the family dined on the porch overlooking the illuminated gardens, Michael made an observation that captured the essence of everything they were experiencing. "You know what's most incredible? How Aunt Elizabeth's love continues to grow, even after so much time. It's as if each person who passes through here takes a little piece of it and makes it grow even more." Robert and Amy exchanged an emotional look. Their son, with his unique connection to Elizabeth, had once again translated into simple words a profound and universal truth. The night was especially clear, with a sky full of stars that seemed to twinkle in approval. In the garden, Elizabeth's white roses shone under the moonlight, and a gentle breeze carried their perfume throughout the property. "True love," Amy reflected, holding Robert's hand as she watched her son drawing by starlight, "is not just a feeling or a choice. It's a living force that continues to grow and transform long after we leave this world." And so, the story that had begun on a stormy night continued to unfold in new chapters, each one richer and more significant than the previous. The Elizabeth House of Advanced Studies wasn't just an educational institution. It was a living testimony to the transformative power of true love, a love that transcends time, space, and even death itself. Because, as Elizabeth had always known, and as Michael constantly reminded everyone, true love is like water. It may seem gentle, but it has the strength to transform even the hardest stones. And when it flows freely, there is no limit to the gardens it can make flourish. The revelations brought to light by Elizabeth's documents had a far-reaching impact that extended beyond the United States. Corruption networks were dismantled, clandestine operations were exposed, and hundreds of victims were rescued. The Elizabeth House of Advanced Studies became the center of a silent revolution that was spreading throughout the world. The impact of the revelations triggered an unprecedented wave of transformation. Governments from various countries began to implement stricter policies for protecting women, inspired by the model developed by the Elizabeth Network. International organizations sought partnerships, and the methodology of welcoming and transformation created by Amy was being studied and replicated across different continents. On a particularly significant morning, as the mansion prepared to receive a new class of students, Michael found yet another hidden treasure. In the bottom of an old drawer, in a compartment that only opened with a specific sequence of movements, there was a small red-covered book, Elizabeth's most intimate diary. "This one is different from the others," he told his parents, his fingers trembling slightly as he touched the yellowed pages. "It's as if she had stored her true essence here, waiting for the right moment to be found." The diary revealed an Elizabeth that few had known, not just the determined woman who fought against injustices, but a deeply sensitive soul who understood the transformative nature of true love. In its pages, she had recorded not only events and discoveries, but also profound reflections on the nature of human existence. "Love," she had written in one of the last entries, "is not just a feeling or a choice. It is a fundamental force of the universe, as real and powerful as gravity. When we learn to channel it correctly, it has the power to transform not only individual lives, but the entire structure of society." Amy, reading these words, felt an even deeper connection with the woman who, even without having known her personally, had transformed her life in so many ways. "It's as if she were speaking directly to us, across time," she whispered, moved. Robert, who over the years had learned to accept and even embrace the more mysterious and inexplicable aspects of their story, observed how his son read the diary with an understanding that went beyond normal comprehension. "She knew, Daddy," Michael said, raising his eyes from the book. "She knew that one day we would find not only the truth about her death, but also the true meaning of her life. Each piece we discover, each life we transform, is part of something much greater that she planned." The discovery of the diary coincided with a crucial moment in the institution's history. The Elizabeth House was about to inaugurate its first independent international campus, built in London, at the same site where, years earlier, they had opened the first welcoming center outside the United States. The new campus would be more than an extension of the American institution. It would be a global center for studies on social transformation through love. The project, developed with the participation of architects and educators from various countries, incorporated symbolic elements that represented Elizabeth's journey and her legacy. "Each space was designed to tell a story," explained Laura Montgomery, who had taken on the coordination of the international project. "From the Garden of White Roses to the Circular Library, everything was designed to create an environment where transformation is not only studied but experienced." The inauguration ceremony brought together people from around the world, survivors who had become leaders, students who are now teachers, women who had transformed their stories of pain into instruments of social change. Michael, who had insisted on participating in the planning of the event, suggested something special for the opening ceremony, an art installation that combined his own illustrations with excerpts from Elizabeth's newly discovered diary. "We don't just want to tell her story," he explained during the presentation of the project. "We want people to feel what she felt, to understand the vision she had of a world where love is stronger than fear, where transformation is always possible." The installation, titled Waters of Transformation, occupied the main atrium of the new campus. The walls were covered with projections of Michael's illustrations, fluid images that constantly transformed, merging with Elizabeth's words in a hypnotic ballet of light and meaning. In the center of the space, a circular fountain had been built, its water flowing in patterns that resembled the waves of transformation that a single loving action can generate. Around the fountain, in golden letters, was inscribed one of the last phrases from Elizabeth's diary. "True love is like water. It seems gentle, but has the strength to transform mountains. It flows through the smallest fissures, finds paths where they seem not to exist, and always carries within itself the promise of new life." During the inauguration ceremony, as Amy delivered her opening speech, something extraordinary happened. A group of blue butterflies, the same rare species that had become a symbol of the Elizabeth Network, appeared in the atrium, dancing around the fountain in a spectacle that seemed choreographed. Michael, observing the scene with his special smile, whispered to his parents, "She is here, not just in spirit, but in every life we transform, in every truth we reveal, in every love we liberate." At that moment, all those present felt something profound and inexplicable, as if the veil between past and present, between the tangible and the ethereal, had momentarily become thinner. It was as if Elizabeth were really there, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a living and transformative presence. The water in the fountain continued its eternal flow, reflecting the lights of the installation in hypnotic patterns. Elizabeth's words projected on the walls seemed to pulse with their own life, and at the center of it all, a new generation of social transformers prepared to continue the work she had begun. Because true love, as Elizabeth had always known, and as Michael constantly reminded everyone, knows no limits of time or space. It flows, transforms, and creates new life, even in the most unlikely places. It is a force that transcends death, that connects generations, that transforms not only individual lives, but the entire fabric of reality. And so, the story that had begun on a stormy night continued to unfold in new chapters, each one richer and more significant than the previous. It was no longer just Elizabeth's story, or Robert and Amy's, or even Michael's. It was the story of how true love, when allowed to flourish freely, can transform the entire world. The 10th anniversary of the Elizabeth House of Advanced Studies coincided with a discovery that no one could have predicted. During a renovation in the old basement of the mansion, workers found a false wall which, when removed, revealed a perfectly preserved small secret office. The space, which seemed to have come straight out of a period film, contained an antique desk, shelves full of carefully organized books, and, most surprisingly, a computer from the 1990s that miraculously still worked. "This is where she really worked," Michael declared as soon as he entered the environment. His, now 16 years, not diminishing in any way his special connection with Elizabeth. This was her true sanctuary. Amy and Robert observed with a mixture of admiration and emotion as forensic technology specialists worked to recover data from the old computer. The process was slow and meticulous, but the results exceeded all expectations. The computer contained not only additional evidence about the trafficking network that Elizabeth had discovered, but also something even more precious, a complete manuscript, a kind of manifesto about the transformative power of true love. Love as a Force of Social Transformation was the title of the document, dated just a week before her death. In the first pages, Elizabeth explained her motivation. "If you are reading these words, it means that the moment I always knew would come has finally arrived. A time when the world would be ready not only to face its deepest shadows, but also to understand that the only force truly capable of transforming them is love. Not the romantic love of fairy tales, but love as a fundamental principle of social change." The manuscript was a revolutionary work that blended social theory, philosophy, psychology, and practical cases that Elizabeth had documented over years. She had created a complete methodology for social transformation based on the principle of love as a liberating force. "It's amazing," commented Laura Montgomery after a first reading of the material. "She wasn't just denouncing crimes or saving some women. She was developing a new paradigm of social transformation." The discovery of the manuscript sparked a revolution in the academic world. Universities around the world began to incorporate Elizabeth's theories into their curricula, and her methodology began to be studied and applied in different social contexts. Michael, who had always understood Elizabeth in a unique and special way, began to have even more vivid and meaningful dreams. On a particularly important morning, he woke up with a certainty that would once again change the course of history. "She wants us to do something specific with the manuscript," he declared during breakfast. "It's not just meant to be a book or a theory. It's meant to be a global movement." Amy, who over the years had learned to trust her son's intuitions, immediately began working on an ambitious project. the creation of a global network of social transformation centers based on Elizabeth's methodology. The Elizabeth movement, as it became known, quickly spread to different countries. It wasn't just an organization supporting women in vulnerable situations. It was a new way of thinking about and implementing social changes based on the principle of love as a transformative force. Robert, observing how his first wife's legacy continued to grow and transform in unexpected ways, felt a mixture of admiration and gratitude. "It's as if she had planted seeds that only now we're beginning to see fully bloom," he commented one night, as he watched Amy and Michael working on the movement's expansion plans. The secret office was preserved and transformed into a meditation and reflection space within the institution. The bookshelves, the antique desk, and even the computer were kept exactly as Elizabeth had left them. The place became a kind of sanctuary where people from all over the world came to seek inspiration and connection. One afternoon, while guiding a group of visitors through the space, Michael made an observation that perfectly captured the essence of everything they were experiencing. "You know what's most incredible about Aunt Elizabeth? She didn't just predict the future, she created it. Each decision she made, each word she wrote, each life she touched, everything was carefully planned to create waves of transformation that would continue long after she departed." The impact of the Elizabeth movement became measurable in impressive statistics. Thousands of transformed lives, hundreds of revitalized communities, dozens of countries implementing programs based on her methodology. But it was the individual stories, the small daily miracles of transformation and healing, that truly demonstrated the power of her vision. Marina, who had become one of the institution's main researchers, developed a longitudinal study on the impact of Elizabeth's work across generations. "It's like a chain reaction of love," she explained during a presentation of her results. "Each person who transforms through this methodology ends up becoming a transformation agent for others." Elizabeth's manuscript was finally published in its complete form, with annotations and comments from Amy, Laura, and other specialists who had dedicated years to studying and implementing her methodology. The book quickly became an international bestseller, not only in the academic world, but also among the general public. "Love as a force of social transformation is not a romantic utopia," Amy wrote in the preface to the work. "It is a practical and proven methodology of systemic change." Elizabeth didn't just theorize about this, she lived it, documented it, and created a path we can follow. On an especially significant night, as the family gathered in the mansion's garden, watching Elizabeth's white roses shine under the moonlight, Michael shared another of his special insights. "You know what Aunt Elizabeth loves to see most? It's not the big buildings or the published books or even all the people we've helped. What she loves most is how love continues to find new ways to flow, like water that always finds a way to reach the sea." Robert and Amy exchanged an emotional look, understanding once again the depth of their son's connection with Elizabeth's legacy. In the sky, a shooting star cut across the horizon, as if underlining the magic of the moment. And so the story that had begun on a stormy night continued to unfold in new chapters, each one richer and more significant than the previous. The love that Elizabeth had planted continued to flourish in increasingly beautiful and unexpected forms, proving that some stories never really end. They just transform, like water finding new ways to flow, always carrying within itself the promise of new life. Life has a peculiar way of creating perfect circles, even when we least expect it. On the eve of Michael's 17th birthday, a young woman arrived at the Elizabeth house in circumstances that seemed to echo the past in an almost supernatural way. It was a stormy night in Aspen, as intense as the one that had united Robert and Amy's destinies so many years before. The young woman, soaked and frightened, carried a small backpack and a look that mixed fear and determination. "My name is Elizabeth," she said when Amy received her at the entrance. "Elizabeth Carter." The silence that followed was laden with meaning. Michael, who was helping organize some documents in the office near the entrance, immediately felt an inexplicable connection with the newcomer. The young Elizabeth's story was a distorted mirror of the past. She had discovered a human trafficking scheme in an art gallery where she worked as a restorer. When she tried to report it, she became the target of increasingly serious threats. "I read about the story of the other Elizabeth," she explained, her hands trembling slightly as she held a cup of tea prepared by Mrs. Martha. "About how she discovered something similar so many years ago. It's as if she had guided me here." Robert, observing the scene from the library door, felt a shiver run down his spine. The young woman not only shared his first wife's name, there was something in her gaze, in her posture, that intensely reminded him of the Elizabeth he had known. Michael, who over the years had become a kind of spiritual guardian of Elizabeth's legacy, approached the young woman with a quiet certainty in his eyes. "You brought more than information about crimes," he said softly. "You brought confirmation that some stories need to be relived, to be finally completed." In the days that followed, the revelations brought by young Elizabeth proved to be even more significant than they had imagined. The scheme she had discovered wasn't just a new criminal operation. It was a branch of the same group that Elizabeth had begun to investigate 2 decades earlier. "It's as if the past and present were meeting," Amy reflected during an emergency, meeting with the investigation team, as if Elizabeth, our Elizabeth, had orchestrated all this somehow. The investigation that followed mobilized the entire international network they had built over the years. The methodology developed by Elizabeth, detailed in the manuscript found in the secret office, proved to be fundamental in dismantling not only the current scheme, but also in identifying and rescuing dozens of victims. One night, while working on the documents brought by young Elizabeth, Michael had one of his most vivid dreams with Aunt Elizabeth. She was smiling in a different way, he told his parents the next morning. She said that now the circle can finally close, not with more death or tragedy, but with life and transformation. Young Elizabeth, who had initially arrived only seeking protection, began to become increasingly involved with the institution's work. Her training in art restoration proved to be a perfect metaphor for the work they were doing, recovering the beauty and original meaning of something that had been damaged by time and circumstances. "You know what's most incredible?" she commented, one afternoon while helping Michael organize a new exhibition about Elizabeth's legacy. "How sometimes we need to lose something precious for something even more significant to be born." The comment touched Robert deeply. Observing his son working side by side with this young woman, who carried not only the name but also something of Elizabeth's spirit, he understood that the universe had mysterious ways of creating meaning, even in the greatest tragedies. Amy, who over the years had learned to see Elizabeth not as a shadow from the past, but as a guiding light for the future, noticed something special blossoming between her son and the young restorer. "It's as if love always finds a way to come back," she commented to Robert one night as they watched the young people talking animatedly in the garden. "Not in the same form, not with the same people, but with the same transformative essence." Young Elizabeth's presence brought a new energy to the institution. Her restoration work wasn't limited just to works of art. She began to develop a program that used art as a tool for healing and transformation for the women sheltered there. "Each damaged work of art we restore," she explained during her classes, "is like a mirror of our own healing journey. The scars don't completely disappear, but they become part of a new story of beauty and resistance." Michael, who had always understood his special connection with Elizabeth as a sacred responsibility, found in the young restorer someone who shared not only his sensitivity, but also his deep understanding of the transformative power of love. On a particularly significant afternoon, while they worked together in Elizabeth's old secret office, something extraordinary happened. A blue butterfly, the same rare species that had become a symbol of the institution, entered through the window and landed on an old photo of Elizabeth that was on the desk. "She's giving us her blessing," Michael said softly, his gaze meeting young Elizabeth's. "Not just for the work we're doing, but for everything that's to come." The moment was interrupted by Amy, who entered the office carrying an impressive discovery. Yet another diary of Elizabeth's had been found, this one hidden inside a false book spine in the library. The words written on the last page seemed a direct message for that specific moment. True love is like a seed we plant without knowing exactly what flowers will be born. Sometimes it needs to wait a long time in darkness before finding the right moment to sprout. But when it finally blooms, its beauty is capable of transforming the entire garden. And so, as night fell over Aspen, the mansion that had witnessed so many stories of love, loss, and redemption embraced one more chapter of its ongoing saga. A chapter that proved once again that true love knows no limits of time or space. It simply finds new ways to flow, new forms to flourish, new stories to tell. Because some stories, as Elizabeth had always known, never really end. They just transform, like water finding new ways to flow, always carrying within themselves the promise of new life, new love, new hope. Spring came to Aspen, bringing more than flowers to the gardens of the Elizabeth house. The relationship between Michael and young Elizabeth blossomed in a way that seemed predestined, as if every moment of their lives had been carefully planned to lead them there. During the months following her arrival, the young restorer had become a fundamental part of the institution. Her art therapy project transformed into an international program, attracting specialists and scholars interested in her unique methodology of healing through artistic restoration. It's amazing how each damaged work tells a different story, she explained during one of her lectures, just as each of us carries unique scars that, when properly understood and accepted, can transform into a source of beauty and strength. Michael, who had always used his art to express his special connection with the first Elizabeth, found in the young restorer someone who not only understood his sensitivity, but complemented it in an extraordinary way. On a particularly significant afternoon while they worked together on the restoration of an old portrait found in the mansion's basement, something surprising happened. Under layers of aged paint, an image began to emerge that made both stop astonished. It was a portrait of Elizabeth, the first Elizabeth, in her youth years. "This is impossible," young Elizabeth whispered, her hands trembling slightly as they carefully removed another layer of paint. This painting must have been painted more than 30 years ago. Michael, however, smiled that special smile of his that suggested understanding of something beyond normal reach. "It's not impossible," he said softly. "It's just one more piece of the puzzle fitting in exactly as it should." The portrait, as they discovered after meticulous investigation, had been painted by a local artist who frequented the same art auctions that Elizabeth investigated. On the edge of the canvas, almost invisible under decades of dust and deterioration, there was a small inscription, "For Elizabeth, may your love continue flowing and transforming lives long after you depart." MWMW, Amy reflected when they showed her the discovery. "Mary Woodhouse." "My grandmother," young Elizabeth completed, her eyes widening with the revelation. She was also a restorer, worked with artworks in New York, but she never told me she knew Elizabeth Steele. The discovery triggered a series of revelations that no one could have predicted. Mary Woodhouse had been more than a simple acquaintance of Elizabeth's. She was a fundamental part of the secret protection network that Elizabeth had built. The restoration studio was, in fact, a passage point for women who needed to disappear and restart their lives. "Now I understand why I always felt this inexplicable connection to this story," young Elizabeth reflected, leafing through old diaries of her grandmother that she had brought from New York. "It wasn't coincidence that I chose to work with restoration, or that I discovered that scheme in the gallery. It was in my destiny since before I was born." For Michael, each new discovery merely confirmed what he had always known in his heart, that true love had the power to transcend not just time and space, but also the very barriers between life and death. "Aunt Elizabeth is more present than ever," he commented one night, as he and young Elizabeth worked late in the restoration studio they had set up in the mansion. "It's as if each piece we restore, each story we discover, is one more thread in the tapestry she began to weave so long ago." Michael and young Elizabeth's joint work began to attract international attention. Their unique approach, which blended artistic restoration with emotional healing, was revolutionizing the way institutions around the world treated trauma and recovery. "We're not just restoring works of art," Elizabeth explained in an interview for an international art magazine. "We're restoring souls, giving people back the ability to see beauty in their own stories no matter how much they've been damaged by time or circumstances." Robert and Amy observed the blossoming of this love with a mixture of joy and admiration. It was as if the universe had found a perfect way to complete the circle that had begun on that stormy night so many years ago. "Do you think Elizabeth, our Elizabeth, knew this would happen?" Robert asked one night as they watched the young people working in the garden, installing a new exhibition that blended restored works with stories of transformation. "I think she knew much more than we ever imagined," Amy responded, holding her husband's hand. "Each choice she made, each seed she planted, everything was part of a greater plan that we're only now beginning to fully understand." The exhibition that Michael and young Elizabeth organized went far beyond a simple display of restored art. It was a celebration of love's capacity to transcend all barriers, to transform even the most painful stories into sources of beauty and inspiration. In the center of the space, a special installation caught the attention of all visitors. The restored portrait of Elizabeth was positioned so that at a certain time of day, the light entering through the skylight formed a rainbow that seemed to emanate directly from her smile. "This is how she really was," Michael explained during the inauguration, "a source of light that continues illuminating paths long after her physical departure." Young Elizabeth, standing at his side, completed the thought. "And this is how true love works, not as something we possess or control, but as a light that passes through us, illuminating other paths, other lives, other possibilities." That night, after the inauguration, as the mansion slowly quieted down, Michael and Elizabeth remained in the garden, seated under the white roses that had witnessed so many stories of love and transformation. "You know what's most incredible?" Elizabeth asked, her hand entwined with Michael's. "How some stories need generations to be completely told. How love finds ways to continue flowing, even when it seems all paths are blocked." Michael smiled, that special smile that always indicated a connection with something beyond normal understanding. "Aunt Elizabeth used to tell me in dreams that true love is like water. It may seem gentle, but it has the strength to transform even the hardest stones." Now I completely understand what she meant. A blue butterfly gently landed on the nearest white rose, its wings shining under the moonlight as if made of liquid light. The moment was so perfect, so laden with meaning, that it seemed almost magical. "I think she's giving us her blessing," Elizabeth whispered, observing the butterfly with watery eyes. "Not just her blessing," Michael responded softly. "Her legacy. The understanding that true love is not something that ends with death or begins with birth. It's a continuous force, always flowing, always transforming, always finding new ways to flourish." And so, under the starry sky of Aspen, one more chapter of this extraordinary story of love and transformation began to be written, a chapter that proved once again that some stories never really end. They just transform like water finding new ways to flow, always carrying within themselves the promise of new life, new love, new hope. The wedding of Michael and Elizabeth was celebrated exactly 25 years after that stormy night when Robert had found Amy. The ceremony, held in the gardens of the Elizabeth house, was much more than a simple matrimonial union. It was the celebration of a complete cycle of love, transformation, and redemption. The place chosen for the ceremony could not have been more significant. Under Elizabeth's old white rosebush, now stronger and more luxuriant than ever. The flowers, which seemed to shine with their own light in the twilight of Aspen, formed a natural canopy over the improvised altar. Amy helping Elizabeth with the last details of her dress, a unique piece that blended restored vintage elements from the first Elizabeth's wedding dress with modern details, couldn't contain her emotion as she saw how each element of the celebration seemed laden with special meaning. "It's as if every moment of our lives had prepared us for this day," she commented, adjusting Elizabeth's veil. "Every choice, every pain, every joy, everything brought us here." The dress itself was a work of art, that told several stories at once. Elizabeth had carefully restored elements of her predecessor's original dress, found preserved in a chest in the mansion's attic. Each piece of antique lace had been delicately treated and incorporated into the new design, creating a piece that literally united past and present. Michael, dressed in a light suit that highlighted his expressive eyes, waited at the altar with that special serenity that had always characterized him. At his side, Robert adjusted his son's tie with slightly trembling hands, his eyes reflecting decades of untold stories. "She's here," Michael said softly to his father. "Not just in spirit, but in every detail, every moment, every beat of our hearts." The sky of Aspen presented a unique spectacle. As the sun set, painting the horizon in shades of pink and gold, a double rainbow formed over the property, exactly like that significant afternoon when Michael was a child. The guests were a living testimony to the impact the Elizabeth house had had on the world. Women from different countries, all touched in some way by the institution, mingled with academics, artists, and activists who had become a fundamental part of that great transformation network. Marina, now a respected international researcher, conducted the ceremony. Her own story of transformation, from frightened young woman to inspiring leader, was a perfect example of the power of love as a force of social change. "We are here today," she began, her voice clear and emotional, "to celebrate not only the union of two extraordinary hearts, but to witness one more chapter of a story that began long ago, a story that teaches us that true love knows no limits of time or space." When Elizabeth began her walk to the altar, a murmur of admiration ran through the assembly. She carried a bouquet of white roses picked that morning, and around her neck a delicate sapphire necklace that had belonged to the first Elizabeth, recently found in yet another of the mansion's secret compartments. But the most emotional moment of the ceremony came during the exchange of vows. Michael, with that special smile of his that always indicated a connection with something beyond normal understanding, began. "When I was a child, Aunt Elizabeth taught me that true love is like water. It may seem gentle, but it has the strength to transform even the hardest stones. Today I completely understand what she meant. Our love, Elizabeth, is not just ours, it's part of something greater, a river of transformation that began long before we were born and will continue flowing long after we depart." Elizabeth, with tears shining in her eyes, responded, "Michael, our story is proof that love always finds a way to return, to renew itself, to flourish even in the most unlikely places. I promise to honor not only our love, but all the legacy of transformation and hope it represents." During the exchange of rings, something extraordinary happened. A group of blue butterflies, the same rare species that had become a symbol of the institution, appeared as if by magic, dancing around the bride and groom in a spectacle that seemed choreographed by the heavens themselves. Mrs. Martha, who even in her advanced age continued to be the beating heart of the mansion, smiled through her tears. "It's her blessing," she whispered, "from both Elizabeths, the one who departed and the one who arrived to complete the circle." The party that followed was a celebration not only of the love between Michael and Elizabeth, but of all the stories of transformation that had flourished in that sacred space over the years. In the center of the main hall, a special exhibition showed works restored by Elizabeth, each telling a different story of healing and rebirth. Amy and Robert, dancing under the stars in the garden illuminated by hundreds of small lights, felt their hearts overflowing with gratitude and admiration. "It's incredible," Robert reflected, holding his wife close to his chest, "how the universe finds ways to create meaning even in the greatest tragedies. How true love always finds a way to return, to renew itself, to create new life. And how some stories need generations to be completely told," Amy completed softly. "How love is a force that transcends time, death, all the barriers we try to build around it." At the end of the night, as the last guests said goodbye, Michael and Elizabeth remained in the garden, sitting on the same bench where so many important stories had been shared over the years. "You know what's most incredible?" Elizabeth asked, leaning on her now husband's shoulder. "How each element of this story, each person, each event, each small detail, seems to have been carefully planned to bring us to this moment." Michael smiled, his eyes reflecting the brightness of the stars. "Aunt Elizabeth always told me that true love is like a seed. Sometimes it needs to wait a long time in darkness before finding the right moment to sprout. But when it finally blooms, its beauty is capable of transforming the entire garden," Elizabeth completed, understanding perfectly. And so, under the starry sky of Aspen, one more chapter of this extraordinary story of love and transformation was completed. It wasn't an ending, because some stories never really end. It was just one more moment of flowering in an infinite garden of possibilities where love continues to flow, to transform, and to create new life, generation after generation. Because true love, as both Elizabeths, had always known, is like water. It finds its way through the smallest fissures, overcomes the greatest barriers, and in the end, always finds its destiny. And in that destiny, it flourishes, in forms more beautiful and meaningful than anyone could have imagined.